Hi, my name is Jesslyn, and in this video, we're going to talk about the law of contrapositive, the law of detachment, and the law of syllogism. So let's talk about the law of contrapositive first. So this is law of contrapositive, and this is kind of review because we've already talked about the contrapositive. So it's the same thing. So a contrapositive is a conditional statement, and it's contrapositive are either both true or both false. That's the law. So P then Q, and the contrapositive is not Q and not P. If not Q, then not P. So if both of these are either both true or if they're both false, then they follow the law of contrapositive. For example, if an angle measures 45 degrees, then it's acute. So if an angle measures 45 degrees, then it's acute. That is true. So that the conditional statement is true. So contrapositive says if an angle is not acute, then it does not, because we have to make them both negative and then we have to switch them, does not measure 45 degrees. If an angle is not acute, then it does not measure 45 degrees. And that's true because if it's not acute, it can't be 45 degrees. So they're both true. So this follows the law of contrapositive. So if you know the law of contrapositive, if you know a conditional statement and the contrapositive, you can assume that they both follow the same thing. They're either both true or they're both false because the law of contrapositive says that. Let's talk about law of detachment. Okay, so now let's talk about the law of detachment. The law of detachment, let me pull up my thing. Okay, the law of detachment says a true conditional statement, and if the hypothesis occurs, then the conclusion will concur. So if it's it has to be a true conditional statement. We're going to assume this is true. If a dog eats biscuits, then he is happy. We know that all dogs, like, if they eat a biscuit, they're going to be happy. So we're saying that this is true. And what the law of detachment says is if the hypothesis, if it's a true conditional statement and the hypothesis happens, then we can conclude the conclusion. So let's say a dog ate biscuits. So the hypothesis happened. So we can conclude that the dog is happy. So if the hypothesis happens, then we can conclude that the conclusion happens as well. And let's just say that we said Fido is happy. So Fido is happy, then that's the conclusion part. We can't assume that he ate a biscuit because that's not what the law of detachment says. The law of detachment says if the hypothesis happens, then we can conclude that the conclusion happens. Not if the conclusion happens, then we can infer that the hypothesis happened. Okay, that's not the law of detachment. So if I just say Fido is happy, the dog is happy, then there's no conclusion. And now we do know that we learned in the law of contrapositive that if the conditional statement is true, the contrapositive is also true. If the conditional statement's false, the contrapositive is also false. So saying that this is true, then we know the contrapositive is also true. And the contrapositive, remember, we switch the order and we take the opposite of it. So the contrapositive is if the dog is not happy, then it did not eat biscuits. So if we say the dog is not happy, that is in the hypothesis. Using the law of detachment, we can conclude that the conclusion is correct too, since we said the hypothesis. So we can conclude that since he is not happy, he didn't eat biscuits. So that is what the law of detachment says. Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about law of syllogism. So law of syllogism says given two true conditional statements and the conclusion of the first is the hypothesis of the second. So the conclusion of the first statement is the hypothesis of the second statement. Then you can conclude that the hypothesis of the first occurs, then the conclusion of the second will also occur. So for example, if it rains today, then we will, not it, sorry. Then we will not have a picnic. So that's our first conditional statement. Then our second conditional statement says, if we do not have a picnic, you see, if we do not have a picnic, then we will not see our friends. You see how the conclusion of one is the hypothesis of another? So if that is true, if the conclusion of one is the hypothesis of the second statement, then we conclude that the hypothesis of that first statement can be in a conditional statement with the conclusion of that second statement. So we can rewrite it and say, if it rains today, then we will not see our friends. And that is what the law of syllogism says. Okay, let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.